Here tonight.
This is Wednesday, October 11th, 2006.
His co-author is in San Francisco right now launching the book there, so it's up to us to kick off the party here. Your being here is very important. All of us, well, if each one of us buys 500 books or gets 500 friends to buy a book, we'll be able to get it on the New York Times bestseller list. So try to do that. We'll shoot for that. And I'm going to introduce the four people who are going to read, and they can kind of raise their hands so you'll know who they are when they step up. Timmons, who is one of the co-authors of this wonderful book. Also the author of the definitive biography on the late and legendary Harry Hay, gay activist, founder of the Mattachine Society and the Radical Fairies, and granddaddy of the gay consciousness movement. An Angelito since 1976 when he arrived as a student at UCLA, Stuart has also been widely active as a local journalist, helping to blow the cover on the Belmont High School scandal, and currently working to end working poverty in LA and curb Walmart's conquest of the planet via his work at the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. Stuart is also the former director of the One Institute at USC, the largest gay and lesbian archive in the nation, and has extraordinary taste in jewelry. Be sure to ask him about the Mule of Glendora.
I'm going to zip through this in the breach. I know that Mink is trying to park. It'll be here in just another hour. I had hoped, and I'm so glad that all the readers were able to take us on a little sort of trip hop through queer time, only which will go to about 1971, and I'll zip through that now, and then talk a little, and then we can have a few questions and answers if you have any. Gay men and lesbians in the LA Gay Liberation Front believed that flamboyant militant actions were indispensable tools for bringing about social change. By the first months of 1970, GLFers, in an incredible burst of energy, were making themselves felt everywhere. They slapped day-glow stickers of crossbones superimposed on the head of a pig, i.e. police, on phone poles and on restroom walls to warn cruising men about LAPD surveillance. They staged noisy demonstrations at the Los Angeles Times because it refused to publish the word gay. The paper soon changed its name, even running a 5-part sympathetic article about the woman homosexual in June of 1970. They ceaselessly picketed Barney's Beanery, a famous West Coast eatery on whose wall hung the illiterate sign, "Faggots with 1G, stay out." It had been a fixture at Barney's for 2 decades, but now it came down. They targeted offensive presentations of gay people on television, protesting the appearance of Gay Gaylord, a recurring character on the Carol Burnett show in the sketch As the Stomach Turns. The show's producers eliminated the character and expressed unprecedented contrition for the entertainment industry's public homophobia, writing to GLF, "We hope you will accept our apology for having offended you." The Gay Liberation Front also battled against the LA gay bars' antiquated rules against social touching, which dated back to at least the 1950s, when the Alcohol Beverage Control Board would revoke a bar's license if same-sex couples were allowed to so much place an arm around one another. Terrified still of having their liquor licenses pulled, many bar owners continued to enforce the taboo throughout the 1960s, but gay militants now proclaimed such rules to be discriminatory. Our bars shouldn't be any harder for us than on us than heterosexual bars are on their customers, and I have been to straight bars where they almost had sex on tabletops, observed the Reverend Troy Perry. The Gay Liberation Front took on the famous West Hollywood bar, The Farm. The Farm's proprietor, Eddie Nash, a Lebanese immigrant born Adel Nasrallah, owned half a dozen other West Hollywood bars that attracted a gay clientele. He tried to enforce the no-touching rule rigorously, even though on any weeknight the farm would be packed with more than 500 people hip to groin. One Gay Liberation Front activist made an appointment to confront the farm's manager. I explained to him that his no-touching policy was trampling on the civil rights of the very people who made his business possible. He said to me, "You don't know who you're dealing with." And with that, he put his thumb down on the desk and twisted it as though he was crushing an ant. The activist, frightened but furious, said he conjured up his nerve and raised the threat. "You don't know who you're dealing with. We'll bomb your bars." And I want to thank the performers who helped bring a bit of this to life tonight, and the charming and talented Trevor Healy for emceeing this. There are too many celebrities here in the audience to mention, not all of whom even got interviewed. Everyone who's gay in Los Angeles I had hoped to interview originally. Just too many. But I'd like a show of hands of anyone who I did interview. Great, okay, and I want all of the people who are raising their hands to sign my copy of the book. I really want to thank everyone. So many people gave so much time and opened up often not the best memories from struggles gone by. And sometimes they only got a line, sometimes they didn't even get a line, but everyone gave incredibly important context to this project. There's a wonderful place in Amsterdam called the Homo Monument, which honors thousands who were lost to fascism in 1930s Germany. I sometimes thought of that while writing this, that it had a quality of a memorial for me. In my 30 years in Los Angeles, I have lost so many friends, having written about the 1950s generation and having lived in the 1980s generation. And so many lives and love stories and friendship stories and acts of bravery and brilliance are just lost whenever we lose an individual. So the motive to do this was powerful, and the task really required looking at a Los Angeles that was long gone before my own personal memory. This book goes from, really picks up a trail in the 1880s and goes up to 2005. But the earliest trace that we found was actually 1540, which is probably the earliest trace of a gay person in the US at all. It was recorded and sent to Spain by a Spanish explorer named Alarcón, who noticed a Quetzal Indian man wearing the clothes of the women of the tribe, which was an honorable tradition among the first Americans, which helped get them unfortunately wiped out. But it was the first part of what it was to be gay in LA. My writing partner Lillian and I had hoped that we would find enough material prior to 1930 to fill one small introductory chapter, and we found so much that we could not fit it in. It became one of the longest chapters in the book, and that was the syndrome with just about every chapter in this. We wound up often saying that we could write a book nearly about every single decade, and certainly the last 3 decades would each be a 3 or 4 volume set. And everyone who's been in the movement is nodding their heads at that. We had to pick and choose and attempt to create a representation, a balance, to evoke some flavor, to reflect the most diverse city in the world in a way that it often has not been reflected, and more than anything else, to tell an untold story. So there are a few things that I'll mention about why it was untold. The pervasive war against gay people is hard to get your head around if you didn't live through it. There was a jury instruction that I found from around 1888 from a Los Angeles judge, which talked about a trial for what was called the infamous crime against nature, which is how any intimacy between 2 men was described. And it was always tried as an assault charge. And the judge instructed the jury that even if the assaulted party consented to the assault, it was still a felonious assault. That was the mentality then. The story of the mule of Glendora was also found in the LA County court records, which described the full wording of the statute of the crime against nature was that it was the infamous crime against nature against man or any animal. Enter the mule of Glendora. Someone actually was charged with committing the crime against nature on a mule and convicted. There is a lot of common knowledge in every generation that gets forgotten due to the sheer volume of time and certain agreements, simply not to discuss certain things. There was an annual event in the last decade of the last century called La Fiesta. They still kind of have a similar thing in Santa Barbara. In LA, it was very clearly modeled on Mardi Gras with all the implications of Mardi Gras. And there was so much cross-dressing going on during La Fiesta that after a few years of these events, there was a law written after a real hounding campaign by the churches in the city, so that the LA City Council passed a law for the first time banning the drag among men and women, which was the law that became the masquerading law. And in this city, just like Washington, D.C. has its political main industry, we have our own main industry of the entertainment industry. The successful double lives of Hollywood still allowed for a gay life, albeit an underground and not so political one, and is very metaphorical for LA for a long time. The public appearances and very different private realities had a huge impact on the way everybody lived here. Those stories are now beginning to just spill out of old closets, but that enforced code of silence really made an impact on this town. We were faced with how do you define gay and how do you define LA, both of which are big challenges, especially going back in time. First, LA used to be Mexico, and before that it was Indian. And as people are understanding today, there is now a sort of a completion of a circle after really 150 years of kind of whiteness and uptightness. But that was a major aspect of our looking into the past as it impacts on the present. Geographically, we included a liberal stretch of Southern California, certainly down to Long Beach, which deserves a book of its own for its own fabulous, distinguished gay history. Malibu, the valley, the beaches, the hills. West Hollywood, which is always the focal point on the news, but as we all know, especially those of us here in Silver Lake, it's much more than that. Defining gay is very tough for the past. The t-shirts all mean something that people were wearing. Social vagrant or pistaches, Malcolm explained, and also the term professional perverted sexualist. These came from a real struggle with a culture that was determined not to speak the word, but to somehow control the behavior in the population. Hollywood reject is a term that was used as part of the LAPD war against gay men. Officers who got into the vice squad, who would regularly go on a detail to entrap as many men as possible in one night's work, were chosen because they were so handsome they could be actors, but they couldn't really act, so they were called Hollywood rejects. But they were trained to dress and act as gay. This is a term that anyone of a certain age will know with a terrible chill. 647A is the code under which gay men were arrested for lewd vagrancy, or vag lewd. It's like I say, it's a term that really sends a chill down any spine that's old enough to have had many friends, as Malcolm mentioned, who had just tens of thousands of lives were destroyed. One of the things that was a real shocking discovery was that the LAPD boasted in the late 40s that they had a list of 10,000 registered sex offenders, by which they meant just ordinary gay men in the city of LA. The reason for going into this, aside from what we described at the beginning, as Corey mentioned in his reading, about so much just going unrecorded. I don't think that story about the 59 altercation ever would have seen print if I hadn't happened to get John Ritchie to just mention it. an amount of firsts that have happened in LA have never been given proper credit, and it's puzzled people for decades and decades. The generation of the 1950s, the homophile generation that did extraordinary work, they would just kind of, groan and say what else is new. New York and San Francisco get all this attention, and we did this all in LA so much earlier. But we really did. The Mattachine Society was the first national gay organization. It was founded in 1950 in Silver Lake. One magazine grew out of that, was seen on every newsstand across the country, and wound up triggering the first Supreme Court decision about homosexuality in the affirmative. They overturned a lower court ruling, making it no longer obscene and illegal to mail anything that simply discussed the subject issues of gay life, and without pictures in one magazine even. It was very demure. Metropolitan Community Church began at a time when almost all gay people were logically turning their back on the church, and Troy Perry here in LA had the foresight to see that eventually that wasn't quite going to serve the needs of the community, and he began what became the largest LGBT religious organization in the world. The Advocate started here in 1967. All of these national and internationally impactful organizations started in LA before Stonewall. And a couple of other things just to mention. The Black Cat was a bar on Sunset Boulevard, not far from here. There was a huge and brutal raid on New Year's Day. It was New Year's Eve of '66 and the day of '67. There were several men who were convicted of giving each other a New Year's kiss that lasted no more than 10 seconds. But they were all convicted of lewd conduct for that, and there was an enormous street demonstration lasting several weeks because of that. The Patch, another LA bar, also triggered a big riot, not riot, but a demonstration in 1968 with the patrons confronting the police. And in those times, you just didn't necessarily have everything fall into place for media and legends to grow. And people have been extremely busy, almost non-stop, right, Ivy? With crisis after crisis for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. The serious accomplishments of our city are not all of it. We have really had a lot of fun with the cultural life, the personal life, and the unflagging humor that you would find no matter how bad the oppression that was going on. There was always, despite the worst of it, a party going on somewhere. The black humor in the face of that is just fabulous. There's one saying from the 1950s when a cop in many of those Hollywood rejects would be spotted instantly for what they were, would walk into a gay bar where men could be arrested for touching. You would often hear someone mutter, "Don't bruise the fruit, Mary, the fuzz is here." I guess the final thing that I'd like to say before inviting everyone to ask a few questions and have a piece of cake is that there are more stories to tell than can ever fit into one readable and saleable book. Anyone who's been involved in writing something like this knows that there's most history books weigh so many pounds that when people pick them up in a bookstore, they put them down because they know how many hours will be required to sort of slug through it. So we tried for a slim volume. It's actually written in a way that I'm sure is going to generate loads of complaints because of all the incredible stories we couldn't quite fit in and the worthy people that we couldn't quite mention. And knowing firsthand at least something about the generations that have been so brave and so smart and stood up and for so many years did it only out of principle, never for a salary. And really wanted to make sure that their stories were remembered and honored. They'll never get the attention that they deserve and commemoration that they deserve. But we lit a candle here, and that is the most that we can hope for. So, and we are really hoping that this will be the beginning of more of this kind of urban history. It's I was inspired years ago by a book called Gay New York, which seemed to tell the entire gay story, but it was so specific to another city on another coast that's its own very unique place, and LA is its own very unique place. So we are a part of the history of LA, and I'm very proud that Lillian and I were able to put this on library shelves. And I would be, at this point, really happy to answer any questions. Please form any attacks in the form of a question. And, and if anyone has anything to ask.